away.
All right, welcome all of the attendees. Glad you're taking the time on Friday evening. You could be out somewhere. Well, I guess you really with Corona, that kind of helps us out, right? But I want to thank everyone for participating in the 1455's second annual Summer Literary Festival. We hope that they spread awareness, and you get on social media. 1455 has a Facebook page. I hope you will go there and like their page and just try to use social media to promote whatever we're doing here. We're hoping that the attendees will dig deeper into any of the books that any of us have written or anything that's offered by 1455. We have the links on the agenda page of the List Fest website is available there for you, and all of your purchases will be shipped directly to your home. All right. So I want to read the session description here. Off the shelf bookshops as community leaders. They're more than just a place to browse. Independent bookstores are local treasures, gathering places, neighborhood anchors, and sometimes even organizers and activists. In today's session, we have these panel of booksellers from different parts in the country. And we're looking at the role of a bookstore as a community institution, the importance of it and what that has meant in the past and also the present, and what's required for us to be a welcoming presence in the community, especially in light of COVID-19. So what I would like to do is just introduce our panelists. I would say myself, I'm Simba Sana, former bookseller, the former CEO and co-founder of Karibu Books. We have with us, Leigh Tivol, who is with the Potter's House in Washington, D.C. The Potter's House, and she's going to speak to this more. It's been around for a very long time, 1960. So I think that would be 60 years, right? This year.
You got it. Yeah.
And then we also have Leigh Jacobson of Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and he's here with us today. And then we have BrocheAroe Fabian, and she has a book company called Riverdog Book Company, and it was located in Portland, Oregon, and she has to speak to this. She has a unique situation, which actually will be helpful to other booksellers, and she will speak to that. My first question to all of you, and Leigh, you can start it out, is please tell us about your bookstore and give us an example or two of how you've done something other than just sell books.
Sorry, Simba, was that for me or for Leigh?
For Leigh.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. This is really fun. We've been planning this for a while, and I'm just super excited that what we cooked up is kind of come into fruition tonight. So yeah, I'm the executive director of the Potter's House. We are located in the heart of the Adams Morgan neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And as Simba said, we're celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. And the Potter's House is a little bit of a different animal. We are a nonprofit social enterprise, which is why my title is executive director and not GM or owner. So we have a bookstore, we have a cafe, we have an event space, but they all operate in service to our values of solidarity, justice, spirituality, and care for the earth, and our role as a welcoming space in a neighborhood that has undergone and continues to undergo enormous gentrification. So I'll say more about this as we continue the conversation, I'm sure, but the Potter's House really, throughout our history, has been grounded in social justice. And even today, we really lean into this notion of radical hospitality and real welcome for anybody who walks in our door. And that takes a lot of forms, as I'm sure we'll talk about more.
Leigh, you can go next.
Yeah. So I'm the owner of Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, which is a town of just over 2,000 people, but it gets over, I think, like 5 to 7 million visitors per year. It's on the highway that goes, like, if you're coming from the Oregon coast inland or vice versa, you basically have to go through Sisters. And there's a lot of festivals and stuff that happen here. And I took over about 2 years ago after working on a bookstore on the West Coast and then one on the East Coast, and then came back here. And the store has been there for 28 years now. So it was already, you know, certainly an institution, but this is a, you know, an overwhelmingly white retirement community that is, you know, often uncomfortable with change, I would say. And I guess we'll get more into that kind of discussion stuff later, but I was very fortunate to come from Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, which was very much kind of like on the, maybe not the cutting edge, but very involved in the industry. Whereas you know, a lot of other smaller stores, particularly in rural areas, are able to kind of just tread water and just like kind of perpetuate themselves. So I was able to come to this store with a lot of really personal experience in different aspects of the book industry. And I guess an example of one of the things that we did last year was we did a book festival that all proceeds from the book festival were used to establish a scholarship fund for graduating Sisters High School students. And I think we did over 45 authors in 3 days, which was a lot, but yeah, so that's certainly an example of community building, I think, so.
Well, thank you. So Brooke, you please tell us something about Dog River Book Company.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be part of conversations like this because I do have such a non-traditional store. And so for those who don't know, Riverdog Book Company is location independent. So far it is operated in North Carolina and Wisconsin and Oregon. And it really has a community that's all over the world. And it comes from my background. I grew up partly abroad and partly in the US. I've never been in a home longer than 3 years in my entire life. And so it is really important to me that when 14 years of a career in the book industry, that when starting my own store two and a half years ago, that I kind of continued that community building aspect that was both hyper local by interacting with book deserts and marginalized communities that didn't necessarily have the access to books in the more traditional stores that I had worked in, and also making sure to be really inclusive of my global community. And so the mission of Riverdog is to promote, highlight, support in all ways diverse, global, inclusive, and representative literature. And so that weaves its way through just about everything we do. And so sometimes that means that we do things like virtual author events, which we have been doing for several years. So for instance, we had, did I pause? Uh-oh, did you lose me? Am I back? I'm back. Good, thumbs up. We had Julia Child, and we didn't have her, she has passed, but we had her grandnephew who came and did a virtual event with us when we read My Life in France, and we had 14 countries and many states represented on that virtual call. And I had a friend in New Zealand who got up at 2 a.m. to join us. And it was just so special to see so many people from around the world at that event. But then on the flip side, we partner with very local organizations to wherever we are to do special events, to bring authors in. And right now we've sponsored little free libraries in different communities where they don't have access to a bookstore, or the libraries are closed, or they're not able to get books in their communities. I've got a basement full. So we try very, very hard to make sure that the books that we put in the little free libraries are diverse and global and representative and inclusive, which often isn't the point of a little free library. It's usually just whatever books people want to share. And that's beautiful. And we don't stop people from putting books in our libraries, but we do make sure that, a few times a week we circle around and curate the collections there.
All right, well, thank you, Brooke. I want to start off with another question. I'm going to start off with Lane. And by the way, let me take a moment to let the attendees know if you have any questions, please post them, and we will try to leave maybe 10 minutes at the end if there are any questions that we can pose to all of the panelists. I want to switch it back over to Lane and ask this question. We'll start with Lane first, but small businesses in general are mainly concerned with, profit margins, et cetera, sales. They may talk a little bit about service, but Leigh, start with you. And the reason why I'm starting with you is I went to your website, Leigh. And I found this beautiful quote that says, by Charles Eliot, books are the quietest and most constant of friends. They are the most accessible and wisest of counselors and the most patient of teachers. So you can start it on this question. What is the difference? What makes an independent bookstore different than a typical small business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that career booksellers kind of just, eat, sweat, and breathe and know, but it's such an interesting line to walk because most bookstores are, for-profit enterprises, but they essentially operate as nonprofits. They're very community driven, and you don't get into it for the money, for sure. And but it's such a fulfilling thing because you're dealing with, it is retail, right? But you're dealing in ideas and experiences and all this stuff. And I think really anybody who either makes a point out of shopping at a local bookstore or doesn't, but that steps foot in a local bookstore, you can really kind of feel that, that energy. And, I don't know if it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing where people who are passionate about these things end up being drawn to this type of work, or vice versa. I know for myself, I started my career as a bookseller part-time. I always really enjoyed the bookstore in my hometown, but I think I really grew into it. Certainly when I started, I did not understand the shop local movement and all that stuff. I was, I think, 18 or 19, and it really was not, I think the shop local movement hadn't really picked up momentum, and it was right when, it was in 2009 or 2010, right when things were kind of just starting to turn around for indie bookstores. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just because they are a place where ideas are exchanged. That's just not something that happens in other retail environments. And then it's particularly exciting now with raised awareness, on issues like climate change and ethical consumerism is a very interesting thing. Like any bookseller who goes to these kind of bookselling conferences will tell you, we all feel guilt, I think, over being, kind of part of the capitalist system that can sometimes be, can take advantage of certain things. But I think most bookstores do a really good job of being conscious of that, if that makes sense.
All right. So let's move it over to Brooke. How about yourself? Tell us, how does your bookstore, what you do differ than from a typical small business?
Absolutely. The entire model. Much.
Are you
I
there?
think I paused again. I'm back now. Yes?
Yes, you're back.
Back. Okay. Very much as a model on purpose. I started reading very early. I was reading in 2 languages by the time I was 5. Books are how I experience the world, both as a familiar thing to me and also as a way to extend my experiences of traveling. And always, always, always in the power of books to connect us and to help us learn. Might have paused again, but you might still be able to hear me. So I'm just going to continue on. The reality is that, am I back now?
Yes, yeah, I can see you.
It's not a sustainable one. It's not one that people can actually make money at. And so the way Riverdog works is that I don't take a salary from it. I work full time doing something completely different. And it's in part because when I tried to make Riverdog viable as a business for probably about 15 years worth of business plans and crunching numbers and all of those things, there was no way to make it work while also taking a salary. And that's the dirty little secret of most independent bookstores. Most people who own them don't take salaries. If you don't have a very well-established store from 60 years ago, or if you don't have some type of angel investment, I'm not going to get, wait, what?
Even then.
Even then, very, very much so. And so that's our dirty little secret, is that we don't pay ourselves. And that's not something that is tenable in my life. I come from a very humble background. I have to pay myself. There's no inheritance somewhere. There's nobody giving me any money. And I'm very open about this. I'm also the generation that spent a lot of money going to school. I have huge student loans. I pay them every month. They're not in default, but I'm considered a pretty bad risk to loan more money to, because of the amount of student loans I have, despite having good credit. And so I'm very open about those things, because it doesn't matter that I have a master's degree, that I have 15 years of this experience, and that I have a business plan that could work. There's no money out there in the world that's going to make a brick and mortar store possible that I can also pull a salary from. And so when I realized that was the case, I thought this whole thing has to flip on its head. So I work full time. I run a bookstore that's community based. It makes no money. And so that's the reality. But I get to do what I love to do and reach into communities and still get them access to books. And that's my personal commitment to this dream of mine. And that dream was thanks to Nora Roberts, a book that I read when I was 15. And there were women that opened a bookstore and an art gallery and a salon all in one. And I thought, you mean I don't have to choose just one thing? I can do it all. And of course, that was a very different time. And it was a book. And the reality is different. But that's how I came to be in this place. The bookstore makes no money, and I devote most of my life to it anyway.
What you were saying, Brooke, when I look at most of the major shifts in my life, either there was a book that propelled me to that shift, or immediately after making that shift, there was a book that helped me to understand exactly what I was going through. And that's the unique thing about books, right? And it covers any subject matter of your life. And, you know, a book literally can change your life. And I don't think there's anything else in the retail arena that can do that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Leigh, can you take up the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we're sort of a different animal at the Potter's House anyway, because we were designed from the very beginning with a double bottom line, right? That the idea is that we make money, or try to, and that there's this broader social mission that we need to fulfill. And, you know, I will say for us, being part of the community really means being a truly welcoming institution. And so, I mean, we have a cafe along with the bookshop, and we give away literally thousands of free meals and free cups of coffee every single year to neighbors who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a meal. And when you walk into the Potter's House, or at least back in the before times when you walked into the Potter's House, you would find this incredible mix of people. Right? You would find the people who helped stand the place up back in the 60s. You would find neighbors who are currently, you know, living without shelter, who are there for the free meal. You're finding people working on their fancy MacBooks. You're finding people who are like leaning across the table, talking to each other about a social issue and kind of coming up with a plan for changing the world. And one of the things for us that's so central is that the Potter's House was always has always been a place where you can be pretty much guaranteed of maybe crossing paths with somebody that you wouldn't cross paths with otherwise. I mean, honestly, for us, in a lot of ways, we operate more like a public library some days than we do a bookstore in terms of just managing the flow of people in and out, and the needs of people. You know, some people want to buy a whole stack of books. Some people want to sit at a table and browse that one book over their cup of coffee for 2 hours. Okay. You know, for us, it's really about finding a space that can be comfortable, for everyone. And I think that a lot of people have this, you know, this romantic idea, right, of the independent bookstore. Like if you have that in your community, then you are made, man. You know, that is something that you really want and need. And you know, I think some of it is that feeling of the exchange of ideas, Leigh, that you mentioned. I think some of it is just the possibility, that sense of possibility when you walk into this place and you're surrounded by books. You know, I don't have a great answer to why we are all so different, other than that I think there is this, you know, you read a book and in a perfect world, you're going to learn something from it. And that is different, as Leigh said, that is different than if I, you know, walk into a store and buy a pair of socks.
You know, what's interesting, you make that point. I just read a book, my son and I read a book together. It was by an Indian philosopher, Ramana Maharshi. And my son's only 14. I'm saying he's not really excited about it. I'm like, this book is a book that literally can be with you for the rest of your life. Like, you may not understand the importance of it, but when you're 30, you're 35, or you're 40, some of the things I'm hoping that you're reading now, you may be able to hold on to. I mean, again, a book is just a special thing because it literally can stay with you your entire life. Even if you don't have the physical book, you remember maybe what you read. And that's the special thing about a book.
Yeah, and I think that emotional attachment to the book is part of what has people get emotionally attached to bookstores too. Yeah.
Look, Leigh, I want to keep this with you because, you know, the Potter's House started in 1960, and I would, in DC now, again, you can answer this, but I would imagine that the civil rights struggle may have had a lot to do with the Potter's House, you know, getting it started. And, I mean, you covered the entire decade from 1960s when you started. I mean, I thought it was late 60s, but no, you started in 1960. Yeah. So I want to start with you, and we'll run through everyone else, but outside of doing like author signings and author talks, you know, when we had our planning session a few days ago, I mentioned the story of Martin Sorcery, who was a bookseller. He owned the Afro-Asian bookshop in Buffalo, New York. And in 1967, there was, similar to what happened with George Floyd, there was a rebellion, people may call it a riot or what have you, the protest movement for like 3 or 4 days. And his bookshop, you know, turned into really a space for people to come and plan, to actively engage the community, maybe in some cases even have, you know, skirmishes with the police. And so what happened with him, that he was actually set up by the police, and he actually was sent to prison. And then eventually the governor commuted his sentence, but he spent like 6 or 7 years in prison, or maybe more, from that incident. He was set up by the police. And he became actually an activist in prison and did prison reform. But I mentioned Martin Sorcery because the question is, you know, what else can bookstores do to move beyond just exchanging ideas, to be actively engaged, whether it's in protesting, activities, like you're feeding families. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can try, and others will have more to add. I certainly don't know everything there is to know. What I will say about the Potter's House is that, yeah, we were launched in 1960 by a group of really progressive members of a faith community, actually. And this turned very quickly into a social justice setting that really, I think, through the years has aimed to be responsive to what's going on in the neighborhood around us. I mean, yeah, the Potter's House stayed open through the '68 riots in DC. The Potter's House has staged protests and hosted performances and, you know, built learning. And there are literally dozens of nonprofits in the Adams Morgan neighborhood for which the ideas were generated across a cup of coffee at the Potter's House, where people in the community were seeing a need and saying, I have to do something about this, and launching an organization. Literally, there are like 3 dozen of these organizations in the community today that came out of this network of people who helped to stand up the Potter's House back in the day. And, you know, I was saying, and we're really, you know, we are continuing to do that. We want to do that. I was saying on our planning call that if you went into our event space right now, you would see that it is jammed, like literally almost to the ceiling, with mutual aid donations from Freedom Fighters DC that's been gathering donations at our space and storing them in the back room for the last 4-6 weeks. You know,
who is the Freedom Fighters DC?
Freedom Fighters is supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests. So, I mean, everything from diapers to books to like protest packages with bottles of water, all of those are being kind of assembled and organized in our back space. I will say we have this huge luxury of space. That's one of the huge assets that we have at the Potter's House. And so we are able to open the doors and say, hey, community, what do you need? When you need to come together, you use our space. You are welcome here. That has always been something we've done. Honestly, right now it's really hard. I mean, in the wake of this revolution, this long overdue revolution that we have seen in the last couple of months, you know, under normal circumstances, we would have been staging protests that started at the Potter's House, and we can't do that safely right now. And so we're really grappling with how do we, you know, what's our responsibility and our role in supporting activism and movements through and with our partners on the ground. But I think there are a lot of ways that you can go beyond the book talk, you know, and really ask this question. I had a former mentor who likes to say, so what? Like, all right, I read the book. Well, so what? What am I going to do with that information? What's the action that I can take? What's the idea that I can generate? And I think that, you know, that's something that I want us to be able to do more of at the Potter's House, as we're able to in the midst of the pandemic, is to really think not just about the books that we bring in, but then how we leverage the knowledge and connection and ability of the people who are coming in and reading those books. How do we deploy those people in service to a larger mission?
Okay, well, thank you. So, Brooke, you want to take that on?
I feel like I'm chomping at the bit, and I'm like, yes, everything she's saying. As obviously as a store that doesn't have space, that's been one of our biggest challenges, and also one of our biggest blessings is that we can focus hyperlocally, and then we don't have to. So one of the initiatives or programs that Riverdog has been involved with almost from its conception was Libros para el Viaje, which is a refugee book drive that one of our sort of, you know, colleague stores down in New Mexico is doing to have books in Spanish donated to them that they are then bringing to people who are detained in the refugee centers or who have been released from refugee centers and have nothing, and making sure that they receive a book as part of that. We've partnered with urban playground movements to make sure that along with, you know, the lunches that are served during the summers, especially, they receive a book, and reading is still happening during the summer. We partnered with a woman who was doing the Bahama Kids Lit Book Drive. When the Bahamas were decimated with a hurricane last year, books, of course, it's the last thing that everyone thinks of, and yet it's a thing that can nourish your soul. And so we sent books to orphanages in the Bahamas and made sure that those books, not just any books, but made sure those books featured Black children, featured people from Bahamas, and also were funny, got people out of the circumstances that they were in, and made sure that they had, again, soul nourishment. Other things we've done, we participated in Bookstores Against Borders, which was an initiative started by a Room of One's Own bookstore in Wisconsin that also raised money for refugees coming through our southern borders. And then as a store, personally for us, my wife is a type 1 diabetic. So not only do we try to do the JDRF, which is formerly the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, it's no longer only juvenile diabetes. So JDRF, we raise money for them every year. And one of the ways that we've done that is that we partnered with cookbook authors. We actually did a cookbook event about cooking for people who are diabetic and what that looks like and how that can still be really tasty and include carbs, and it's fine. But we did that as part of a kind of community awareness and learning and growing, and then raising money for this cause that's very close to our heart. So there are so many ways to get involved and form community and support mission without even having a physical space. So it's much preferred often if you can.
All right. So you're up next, Leigh. Can you add something to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we're doing it in our own way in Tiny Little Sisters. I think bookstores kind of just putting a different label on the idea of idea exchanges. A bookstore And therefore, like, the owners and managers are kind of the ultimate networking centers, because you have so many connections throughout a community where you work with these people on this thing and those people on that thing. And when there is some sort of inflection point, like what we've seen in the last few months, there are just like myriad opportunities to go, I know these 3 people that I need to get together for this thing, and these 2 people that I need to get together for this thing. And so through that, our store has played a role in organizing weekly Black Lives Matter protests here in town. We provide a space for this kind of budding, hopefully soon to be nonprofit, Central Oregon for Social Justice. So we provide a space for them to meet. So there's things like that, but I have really been inspired by what I've seen other stores around the country who are particularly in places that are seeing a lot more activity in this. You know, Room of One's Own, is a really great example of that. But there are plenty of stories of bookstores, people staying there overnight to actually be a shelter for protesters and to house protesters, and stuff like that, that I think is just, really spectacular. And that's something that, again, not a lot of other businesses are doing, because I think just inherently in the work, you are mission driven, even if it's not in what your bookstore's published mission is. You're kind of by default going to be mission driven.
Okay. Look, Leigh, I want to swing it back over to you. Here's the question. I went to the Potter's House website, and I saw there was a video that talked about the Potter's House and kind of his mission. And when I was watching it, it made mention, this is going on in a lot of inner cities throughout the country, but in DC in particular, it made mention to gentrification in Washington, DC. And the question, I want to start with you first, Leigh, is give me an example, and maybe the gentrification may be a good one for the Potter's House, or if not, give me another one. Give me an example where the leadership of the Potter's House or your bookstore wanted to kind of push an agenda or had an idea, wanted to maybe engage people about that particular idea, whether it's gentrification or something else that the owners or the people in the management felt strongly about. Can you give me an example? We'll start with you, Leigh, and we can go. I know, Brooke, I know you probably have a bunch as well, examples.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I have such a long story at the Potter's House because I started as executive director last September. So my personal history is not actually a very long one. Yeah, I mean, I think there are many examples of, and gentrification, I should say, is very much part of our day-to-day at the Potter's House. I mean, half a block down the street, there's an enormous fancy condo building going up that's just adding to the array of other fancy condo buildings that are already in the neighborhood. And we're really keenly aware that, we're a place that you could still, like, you're going to walk in there and you can pay $4 for a latte, and that not everybody is able to do that, right? And that even for those folks who are coming in and getting a free meal, that there is a barrier to doing that. And we've been thinking a lot about how we remove those barriers and make this place one that is easier to access for everybody. Whether you're working a service job, or you're working a white collar job, or you're not working at all. So that's something that's very present for us. I will say, I don't think there's ever been a time, I would hazard a guess, again, there's 59 years before I got there, but I don't think that there's ever been a time when anybody has said, well, this idea for fighting for the rights of immigrants is not one that we're going to move forward on, or this idea for moving toward environmental justice is one that we're not going to move forward on. There have been literally dozens of those kinds of movements over the course of the Potter's House's history, and they are largely community driven. I mean, I think that what I've really come to see over the last 9 months that I've been there is that we as the bookshop are not the ones who have to drive the content. We can offer our space and our platform and our voice to others in our community who are already doing the work, in many cases who have been doing the work for years and years. So whether that's around race or immigration or economic inequality or the environment or disability or LGBTQ stuff, whatever that is, it's not just about what ideas we have, it's about what does our community need and what are we uniquely suited to offer to support that work? What are we built to do? And so that's the question that we're asking every day, and always looking for those ideas and partnerships that we can help to advance from our perch as a community institution.
And you know, the unique thing about Adams Morgan, I'm not sure if you're from DC, but I've always felt like Adams Morgan was like, of all places in DC, it was almost like living in New York. You know, it's very, it has a upscale side, you know, it's expensive to live there. Like you say, you $4 for a cup of latte, but it's also very seedy, right? It has a seediness to it too, and all the restaurants, and it has the kind of a club scene. It has you have a Hispanic community who's really strong there. They had a very strong African presence at one time. So the Potter's House being in Adams Morgan is very, you know, I mean, it's a great place to be in if you're into social issues and you want to kind of elicit or kind of be at the forefront of change.
We love it for that very reason. Yeah.
All right. So Lane, we'll swing it over to you.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I know, so I've been in like bookstore management for a number of years, but only being an owner for 2 years, coming up on 2 years, this is something that I have actually really enjoyed. It's perhaps been my the thing that I've enjoyed the most. And that is just having the freedom to like just do these things and not have to work through kind of a bureaucratic process. There's a nonprofit that I will not throw under the bus that operates here in Central Oregon that I was on the board of. And this was like a year ago that I felt really strongly that we should bring in somebody from the Portland area who actually specializes in coming to rural Oregon communities and teaching about implicit bias and stuff like that. And we had the budget to provide free workshops to the community, a whole series of workshops on it. And I was just met with a lot of pushback, and I was able to say, you know what? I have a platform to do this, and I'm just going to do it myself. I'll apply for some grants. I'll see if there are members in the community who want to help pitch in to cover some of the costs. And of course, this was derailed by COVID, but it is something that I certainly hope to bring back. And we were also working on doing free Spanish classes for native English speakers and vice versa. Because there is a pretty significant Latinx community here that is very segregated from the white community. And so just being able to take action is something that I think is really great, that bookstores and maybe this, I guess, you mentioned Potter's House has never really run into this problem, but I imagine that some bookstores that do operate as nonprofits and have a board and have donors and stuff maybe do run into that a little bit. But one of the benefits is, you know, I don't have anybody to answer to other than, you know, my customers really and my staff, but you know, they're on board. So
no one's controlling your purse strings.
Nope,
No.
not yet.
Okay. All right, and so Brooke, I saw, I mean, several things. I was like, you know, you have the dealing with the border issue, you know, with the refugees. I mean, them needing to learn a new language, perhaps. I saw diabetes. I mean, you have a lot too. So you have a lot of examples. Can you give us maybe one or two?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the projects that we're working on right now is forming a nonprofit entity that is separate from the bookstore, but that will work hand in hand with the bookstore, because we have found that there are certain things that as we cannot get the support, the financial support, that is needed to make those programs run. No one, you know, you're not going to get a grant as a for-profit for the most part. As a nonprofit, there are other struggles, and some of those come with, yes, making sure that you have a board and yes. So the hope is that those two can work in conjunction to actually make a bookmobile happen, so that we can have some type of a physical presence. We can go into, again, those book desert communities, disrupt that purely transactional nature of entering a bookstore. But at the same time, we have a space. And one of the things I would love to do is create a kind of Airbnb for authors, for writer retreats, so that you can have, you know, kind of a pull-out couch space. It's a bookstore by day. It's an Airbnb for a writer at night. I love the idea of bringing those things together in a small space, like a bookmobile that could be used for things. But again, when you go down this rabbit hole, I think one of the things that happens with gentrification is that it comes from, in some cases, you want a nice place to live. You know, someone that, it comes from an immigrant family that has spent years, you know, living, not having our own home, renting really questionable places. I've lived in some of those not nice places. You want a nice place to live. You know, for a bookmobile, I went down the rabbit hole of how do I make this more environmentally friendly, more sustainable from a cultural, economic, and environmental aspect. I can get a bookmobile on the road for $5,000 next week, or I could spend $100,000 and have a beautiful, you know, thing that is working with the environment, and is great for culture. So when you sleep at night, I feel like sometimes when we talk, and I'm paused, I'm frozen, am I back?
You're back, you're back.
Sometimes I feel like when we talk about gentrification and its impact, it is hard to parse out the strain of good that wanted to come through it, and how that's been such a problem in so many communities. And I feel that way with my bookmobile, that my fear is that in wanting to do something that's $100,000 build, to have it be the pinnacle of what it is it actually going to work to bring it into communities where they're going to see this object and be like, we don't know what that is. That doesn't relate to us. Your books are $40, you know, a hardcover on the shelf. And then to say, oh, but these two shelves, you can choose from those two. Those have been sponsored by rich white people. That's a horrible feeling. And so when I started to go down that road, I thought, how can I actually make now maybe two things? One that's a bookmobile that is community focused for everybody. One that is more stationary. That's the Airbnb. I don't know. But you start to run these thoughts and you start to crunch these numbers, and then it's 5 years later and you haven't done it yet. But sometimes I think that's where we have to balance. We have to balance these things. And that's where I feel gentrification comes into a neighborhood sometimes. And as a bookstore, you're like, how do I serve the changing community that's out there and still do the work that's central to what I want to be doing?
Yeah.
So,
Simba, if I can add one more thing to that, Broche, you just sparked a few more thoughts for me. I mean, I will say a couple of operational things and then a mission thing. So operationally, I will say, you know, we do our best to hire from our community. We have several employees who have been with us for years, who live around the corner. We hire as regularly as we can through a partnership with a workforce development organization, hiring people who have been formerly incarcerated. So part of it for us is, how are we operating, right? And how does that chip away in the tiniest little way, perhaps, but still chipping away at this gentrification, you know, behemoth that we're facing. The other thing, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is I'm thinking a lot about all those rich white people who are coming in and buying my $4 lattes and the you know, $30 hardcover book. And I'm like, well, again, those people are connected and they know how systems work, and they might have some free time because they're sitting around on a Sunday morning shooting the breeze with their friends. So how do I, and this is something I was trying to start figuring out, and then coronavirus happened. So, you know, book market, pardon the pun. But like, how do we organize those people? What is the policy initiative that we all get them to write their damn letters for, right? Because these are people who actually, I mean, if we lived in a city where we had representation, would know how to work with their members of Congress. So that is something that I really think that bookstores can think about, is what is, you know, what the constituency that is coming in, how can we have those. And I joke and I say it's rich white people, and it's not exclusively that, but like there's a lot of that. But how can we harness the power of these people who are coming in in service to something that serves the broader community in the face of gentrification.
Absolutely. Just to really quickly piggyback on what you said, my full-time job is for a nonprofit that raises money for people. So we just passed in my region a $250 million a year measure to fund homeless services for the next 10 years. That was on the backs of the money that predominantly rich white people raised to be able to run a campaign for that. So it's absolutely a lesson. and they're still community, right? Community is inclusive. And so how can we use each other for good?
Look, when I was an active bookseller, one of the things I took great pride in is sometimes when I was entering the bookstore or coming out of the bookstore, I would see a customer walking down in front of the bookstore and they would point to it and say, man, that's my bookstore right there. Always made me feel good. So my next question is really a two-part question. First part is, when you create your bookstore and it becomes active in the community, and it kind of officially becomes like a community space, I don't know when that demarcation, when it becomes a community space, but you kind of feel it. And even though the bookstore is privately owned, or it's, in the case of the Potter's House, it's a nonprofit. So the first question is, who does the space really belong to? And the second question I want to add on to this is, tell me something, each one of you can answer this, something that you've learned since you become a bookseller. It could be a hard, a lesson that you had to learn, some area of personal growth. So, you can answer both questions. So we can start with you, Brooker, since I'm looking at you. On the big screen.
Shoot, not it. Obviously, the first question as a community space, not having one, I'll just say one of the lessons that I've learned, I'll try to connect the two, is how incredibly welcoming other community spaces can be to the programs that we've partnered on. And it's been actually incredibly humbling and a good learning experience. I don't need to have my own space because I can so well partner with people who have their community spaces already. And it was a dream and a goal, and I'm just so honored that has worked out, that people have entrusted their spaces to me and my programs, and their communities to me and my programs. So that's been incredibly humbling, and it's the level you can't ask for. And I need to get better about that for my nonprofit because I'm fine asking for help, for space, for community involvement, for all of those things when I feel like it is a selfless, mission-based cause. And I am still really bad at asking for the money to make those things work.
And Brooke, to add on something else, since you are a virtual bookstore, what advice would you have for, Lane, any other bookseller who may be listening in, or who may listen on in the future, or even the Potter's House? Any advice you have, because you have more experience in that area? The COVID has kind of made you sort of an expert for the rest of it.
Definitely still learning, and this is learn from me. So this is something that happened just this week. I had a partnership with a publisher. I looked up the book when I first got that partnership about a month ago. 3 days ago, the post I had scheduled a month ago went live. And within 10 hours, I got 3 comments on that Instagram post about the content of the book and the author of the book, and some drama that had broken 2 days ago that I didn't know about. And I immediately took the post down. I engaged with those 3 people that made those posts, and had private messages with them, thanking them, saying we were learning. This was something we didn't know about. We looked into it. This is our response. I reached out to the publisher. I said, I know this might threaten my contract with you, but I cannot put that book up on my social media and promote that, considering what's happening right now. And had to both humble myself in front of the community.
Are you still there? Brooker?
Hello?
Yeah. We can see
Still here?
you.
Still here, dancing in my corner. Okay. And so, not sure where you lost me, but the point was that I had to respond publicly and privately to my community, honor what they had taught me, and then also risk that relationship with the publisher to be honest to them and say, this is who my community is. And my community has let me know this is not acceptable. And I need to respond appropriately and honor my community's wishes. And so I would say in a virtual space or in a physical space, we have to be aware of who our community is and make those decisions based on what's right for responding to their needs.
All right, Lane, can you put your weight on this question or these two-part questions?
Yeah, I think, this is something that I have recent experience with, taking over the bookstore that had been there for 26 years, particularly coming in as somebody who was young. I was 28, 27 when I bought the bookstore, and coming from the East Coast, people were very wary of me. I had to be very careful to come in and not, shake things up too much too fast, because I think that it really does belong to everybody. I think that, we do play kind of a gatekeeper role to some degree, and that when you take that seriously, it's a big responsibility. But Brocha, you mentioned something that eliminating the transactional nature of the relationship. And I think that that is something both for, like authors who have relationships with bookstores and customers, is it doesn't have to be, but it can be such a great thing when it's not just about, like, when your book is coming out, you come to us and want us to, host you for an author event, and then we never hear from you again. And, whatever, because these are things, the stuff that we've been talking about, these are things that most bookstores all over the country are doing to some degree, or to a way that's catered specifically to their community. And when you create that ongoing relationship and it becomes your space, that's just such a cool thing. And it ultimately, is, if you are an author, is going to end up selling more books, because your name and your book is just going to come up more throughout, these things. And it just feels better too. And I think that Potter's House has done a really good job with that. I've been there before, and it's an awesome space. And I've also, months ago, have messaged Brocha about how good the virtual space that she's created. It's the closest thing you could have to coming into a real bookstore, doing that through a virtual space. And then just something that I learned, this is something that somebody else mentioned to me that was like a huge light bulb moment. And it's a phrase that's usually applied to, I think, healthcare workers, but the idea of compassion fatigue. This is an industry where, people are coming into the store and often, needing support. I remember the day after the 2016 election it was a dark day for a lot of people everywhere, but in a bookstore, especially because these are spaces where people feel safe. And then, we're also, if you're a buyer for a store, you're looking at, 100 books that are about a certain topic and you have to decide how to filter those down into the 4 or 5 that you're going to carry. And it just ends up being a lot. So taking care of yourself and often finding energy and comfort in the community that you've become a part of is really something that I've learned and continue to learn. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you. So Leigh,
Yeah. I'll jump in quick on this. I know we're running short on time.
We have like 3 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be quick. I'll just say, to the question of who owns a space, I often say that if you had 10 people who walked into the Potter's House at one time and you asked them who owned it, like they would all think they owned a piece of the Potter's House, and it's because they actually do.
Okay.
It's because they actually do. Because we were so lonely without our community in those weeks when we were closed earlier this year. The Potter's House is about the people who come into it, all of the people, no matter who they are or what they have or don't, or what they believe or don't, or what they look like or don't, and any of that, right? So yeah, I think they all kind of do own the space. And we, you know, it's our job to sort of set some ground rules and facilitate some interactions and make some learning possible. But that's the approach that I hope that we'll continue to use going forward. Oh, so many lessons have I learned in the last 9 months, some of them the hard way. But I'll just say, this is more of a life lesson than a bookstore lesson, but it applies. I have learned that when I have a hard decision to make about where we need to go as an organization and as a community, that I have to step back and ask myself, what are the values? And if I make the decision, even if it's a hard one, if it's grounded in the values of our community, then I can stand behind it and I can defend that decision to my last breath. So that's who I think about when I'm trying to make this any sort of a difficult or even a minor decision. I'm thinking about who's our community, what do they need, and what are the values we need to stand behind in order to get there.
Well, the last so we have like less than a minute really. Leigh, I'll push it back to you. Final thing, you want to promote your store, website, and really give us, you know, how can customers, beyond just buying a book, how can customers support the Potter's House?
Well, I would say this for any bookstore. I mean, I would say when you have the opportunity to, when your bookstore tries to engage you in something else, like something beyond, something that's off the shelf, something beyond just buying books, maybe explore that. Go to that event. Fill out that form. You know, write that letter to your member of Congress if you're lucky enough to have one. Take the opportunities to really support all the ways that the bookshop is a community institution beyond to, but also including selling books.
All right, quickly, Brooke.
That was an incredibly great answer, very cohesive. I don't necessarily have more to add other than interact with your stores. Like Leigh had said, come in, see them online, their Instagram, Twitter, follow their newsletters. Bookstores tend to write great newsletters. Interact with them. Let them know you're part of their community.
Okay, and Lane?
Yeah, same thing, just different phrase, like deliberate participation. You know, if you want these programs and these things to continue, got to be a part of it, have to participate.
All right, I want to close it out. I want to thank everyone for joining today, the attendees, all the panelists, participants. You know, the programming is free. The 1455 was made this free, but you know, the cost isn't free, right, to produce this. So look, you know, any support that, if anything touches your heart, participants, attendees, please, you can make a tax deductible donation to 1455 Lit Arts, that's plural, Lit Arts org, LITARTS.org, and you know, that will help keep our programming free. And again, I want to thank everyone for your time, and this was a nice conversation. Have a blessed weekend.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Simba.